In the crowded streets of the old city, where the morning sun filtered through the gaps in the buildings and the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread, a young man named Adrian walked briskly carrying a worn leather satchel full of sheet, music, and dreams. He had just returned from a short tour in Europe where he had performed with orchestras and soloists. Yet he felt incomplete, as if the music he played was missing a soul that resonated with his own. On that particular morning, he found himself drawn to a small park tucked between two buildings where a few children chased a stray dog and an elderly man fed pigeons. Adrian set up his violin and began to play the soft melodies of Vivaldi, hoping to find solace in the familiar notes. He was so absorbed in the music that he did not notice her at first. She was standing a few feet away under the shadow of an old oak tree, her dark hair flowing in the breeze and her hands nervously clutching a notebook Adrian had noticed. Many people listened to street musicians, but there was something different about her. She did not just listen. Her eyes followed the bow of the violin as if she could feel every vibration of the strings. She stepped closer and whispered, "Do you take requests?" Adrian paused, slightly confused, and then nodded. She hesitated before speaking again. "Play the violin, and I will marry you." He laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, and replied, "I cannot promise such things to a stranger." She smiled coyly and said, "Then I will wait." Adrian continued to play, unaware that her eyes glimmered with a mixture of mischief and sincerity. Over the next few weeks, they met in the same park where Adrian played the violin, and she watched from under the oak tree. She never spoke of her life, but she listened intently and sometimes hummed along. The connection grew silently, as if the music itself was weaving a bond between them. Adrian started looking forward to those moments and noticed that his music sounded different when she was around, richer, fuller, somehow infused with hope. He began to wonder if fate had led her there, or if she was merely a dream made real. She would sometimes disappear without a word, leaving Adrian puzzled and restless. Yet he could not stay away from the park, and the thought of her lingered like an unfinished symphony. One day she approached him, holding a piece of paper, and said, "Write something for me." He handed her a blank sheet and a pen, expecting a casual note. But instead she wrote, "Play the violin, and I will marry you," with a tiny heart underneath. Adrian was stunned. He laughed nervously again, thinking it was a whimsical fantasy, but she looked at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. That evening, as he walked home, the melody he had played lingered in his mind, but now it carried a strange weight, a promise unspoken, yet undeniable. Weeks passed, and Adrian found himself consumed by thoughts of her. Her sudden appearances and disappearances had become a rhythm in his life, as predictable and unpredictable as the rising sun. She remained an enigma, sharing little about herself, and yet demanding his attention with that strange promise that now haunted him like a ghost. He tried to ask questions about her family, her work, her life outside the park, but she evaded everyone, smiling mysteriously and saying, "Music tells more than words." Adrian was intrigued and frustrated simultaneously. He began composing new pieces inspired by her, presents each note trying to capture the essence of her without knowing exactly who she was. One rainy afternoon he arrived at the park, only to find her sitting on the damp bench holding an umbrella that barely covered her slender frame. She looked up and smiled with a quiet urgency. Adrian asked, "Why do you insist on this marriage line?" She laughed softly and said, "It is not just about words. It is about seeing if you understand the music of life." He frowned, unsure what she meant, but she continued, "Life is fragile, unpredictable, and full of hidden truths. You play the violin with all your heart, but can you see the heart of another person?" Adrian was puzzled yet drawn in by her words and found himself wanting to unravel her mysteries. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching something quickly, handing it to him. He looked down to see a rough outline of a violin entwined with two figures walking on a path lined with trees. He asked what it meant. She said, "This is our story, if you are brave enough to play it." Adrian spent sleepless nights thinking about her, wondering what she meant by bravery and whether the story she spoke of was real or a test. He began visiting the park more frequently, trying to understand the subtle clues she left behind, and in the process he noticed small details he had overlooked, before the way she tilted her head, while listening, the way she hummed softly, even the way her eyes followed the falling rain. He realized that the promise of marriage was not a literal demand, but a challenge to see if he could match her depth of feeling and commitment to life and music. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the park, she approached him with a small wooden box and handed it to him without a word. Curious Adrian opened it to find a miniature violin carved from wood with delicate strings. He understood immediately that this was more than a gift. It was a test of his devotion to his art and to the unspoken bond between them. She watched him carefully as he played a slow, tender melody, and when the last note lingered in the air, she smiled and whispered, "Finally, you are ready." Adrian had played the miniature violin for what felt like hours, unable to stop the flow of music that seemed to rise from deep within him. She remained silent, but her presence was overwhelming, like a lighthouse guiding a ship through the fog. He felt a surge of emotions, happiness, fear, anticipation, and awe, all at once. She finally spoke and said, "You have seen the music of life." Adrian looked at her, confused. She said, "Life is not about promises made in passing. It is about understanding the depth of another person and choosing to be present in all their joys and sorrows." His heart raced as he tried to grasp her meaning. She continued, "When I said, 'Play the violin and I will marry you,' it was never meant to be taken lightly. It was meant to see if your heart could follow mine, even into the unknown." Adrian felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He had been preparing himself to hear a literal yes or no, but instead, he was faced with a test of character and courage. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to him. He opened it to find tickets for a month-long tour across Europe and Asia. She said, "I am leaving tomorrow to perform, and I want you to come with me if you dare." Adrian was stunned. He had expected a simple answer, not a whirlwind adventure. She smiled, mischievously, and said, "This is the moment you either step forward or remain behind." Adrian did not hesitate. He felt the music within him swell and realized that this was the true meaning of her promise. To marry, not just in words, but in shared experience and commitment to the life they would create together. He nodded and said, "I will come," and she laughed, the sound mingling with the rustling leaves like a harmony they had both longed for. They spent the evening in the park one last time, before the journey exchanging music stories and laughter as the city lights flickered around them. The next morning they departed together, violin cases in hand, hearts intertwined, and a new melody waiting to be written on the roads and stages of distant lands. Adrian never expected her to challenge him in this way, to turn a whimsical statement into an extraordinary adventure, and yet he understood that this was the essence of love and art intertwined, a promise fulfilled not by words, but by courage, devotion, and the willingness to play life together no matter where it led.